up a dive. Feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, so I remember I share and subscribe. Join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the crew. Untold Radio Network, the secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
Good morning, monsters, and welcome to this week's episode of Monsters on the Edge. I am your host, Barnaby Jones, here on the Untold Radio Network. We are live today, guys, so if you have questions or comments throughout the show, throw them in the comments section, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. If you want to come hang out with myself in person and my team, we are going to be at SilCon in Gaze, Illinois for this big horror, anime, paranormal, gaming, cosplay, and cryptids convention. It is September 19th and 20th in Gaze, Illinois. And you can come out and check that out. Head on over to wisconsincaps.com. Click on the Public Events tab for all the information. Then, guys, we head to Van Meter Visitor Festival in Van Meter, Iowa, September 27th. And then we are going to be at the Neenah Public Library in Neenah, Wisconsin for Exploring the Paranormal, a presentation on paranormal activity and things of that nature, as well as a live paranormal investigation of the library following the presentation. And coming up next year, we are coming to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, April 17th through the 19th for CapCon, Missouri. And then we head to Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, May 8th through the 10th for CapCon, Wisconsin. So you got some pretty cool stuff to look forward to coming up next year. But right now, guys, let us get to our guest today on our show. We are live. As I said, so if you have any questions for guests throughout the show, throw them in the comments section. My guest today is Robert Bitto. He hosts the podcast YouTube show Mexico Unexplained since 2016 and has published 3 books on the magic and the mysteries and the miracles of Mexico. In addition to his MBA and BBA, he holds an MA in Latin American Studies from the University of New Mexico. In 2016, 17, 15, and 16, he served as the San Diego chapter president of Mensa. Please welcome to the show, Robert Bitto. Welcome, sir. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure is mine, man. The second I looked over your website and saw the chupacabra on there, I knew this guy needs to come on the show. We got to talk. So, as you have this lovely coloring book that we were talking about, Mexican Monsters, the coloring book, and there he is right there, my favorite cryptid right on the cover. So,
well, it seems like it's everybody's favorite Mexican cryptid, from what I can tell. But there are literally hundreds of others that we could spend hours and hours and hours of talking about. So, wherever you want to go, if you want to start with this guy, I'm up for it.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to know what has been happening recently with the chupacabra. What have I know you get down there sometimes, hear a lot of stuff. What have you heard? Are they still sightings? What's going on with that?
The sightings have kind of died down. There have been certain other monsters that approximate the chupacabra that could be possibly classified as one of them. Like there was a sighting in a town called Lerdo in the northern part of Mexico just a few years ago, and it had all the markings of the chupacabra. But people weren't calling it that. They were calling it the Lerdo monster. And because there were some differences with that creature and the chupacabra. But overall, the sightings of the chupacabra have died down. And there could be a lot of different factors at play to explain why. So the popularity of this creature really got kicked off by a Latin American TV host named Christina, and she's a Cuban American out of Miami, and she was really the first person publicly to talk about the chupacabra. And Christina has an audience of, potentially hundreds of millions of people throughout Latin America and then throughout the United States. When she started talking about it, that's when all of the sightings seem to come to the forefront in Mexico. Now, that could be explained in a couple different ways. One could be that since people saw this creature on the Christina show, that gave them the permission to talk about it. Or then on the other hand, you can say that people started to see things once they heard about this creature. That growling at night, that's by the chicken coops, that could be that creature. And so it was strange that when this television show came out, all of these sightings, is just the number exploded. And so I don't know what to make of it, but there are 2 different types of this creature, apparently. There's one that's kind of scaly and more reptilian and has spikes on its back. And then there's one that's more canine. And the canine type of this creature is the one that's been sighted mostly in Mexico. The reptilian type is more Puerto Rico, I think. But it's mostly in Mexico that you find this blood-sucking canine creature that lurks around at night and, kills your livestock. So yeah, in the mid-late 90s, huge upsurge in sightings of this, or reporting of it, but then it's kind of died down. So he's not as popular as before. There are other cryptids that have taken his place in the number 1 slot, though. But Chupacabra is always the most interesting cryptid in Mexico for Americans because they really don't know about all the other cryptids, and that's why I wrote that book. The book that I wrote, Mexican Monsters, is the only book on the market that has to do with cryptids in Mexico. But yeah, Chupacabra, if you have any other questions about that, I can answer whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's the big popular one, it seems.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think, that was the one that kind of got up here into the United States and, made the headlines around the world and stuff. But
Yeah.
so I've heard that down there now you talked about how the name of these things kind of changes, and like they have the same kind of similar sighting reports, but there's a lot of like colloquial names of different things, especially
Mhm.
before the internet. When these things were sighted, you have things named after like the cities that they're seen. But
Right.
I've heard that down in Puerto Rico now there's a bunch of sightings of gargoyles. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, I have. I don't know much about it, but I've heard that. Yes. I think it's kind of strange. But, a lot of people think that these creatures that appear in Puerto Rico have a government connection. And I'm sure you've heard of that too. That there's a base in Puerto Rico that has done biological experiments and has created creatures. And so, yeah, gargoyles, sure, why not?
I've been curious, like, because of that, like I said, if you take away the name, El Chupacabra has kind of died down there, and now all of a sudden there's these gargoyle things. So I'm wondering if it might be the same creature, and now since the name has just kind of fizzled out, they've come up with a new name, or somebody just called it something else because that's how they described it. So
Yeah, that could be very much. Yeah.
interesting. I don't know. Well, you look into that. Get back to me. Take a
I,
trip to Puerto Rico for me.
I will. Okay.
Awesome. Well, so there's a lot of other things down there. So tell me about some of the other weird creatures that are roaming the Mexican countryside.
Well, a lot of people don't know, but Mexico has a lot of different components to what we're familiar with here north of the border. Like Mexico has a Bermuda Triangle. Mexico has two Bigfoot creatures. Mexico has a Loch Ness monster type creature. They have also a Dogman type creature. I know that's popular to talk about. Yeah, so there are a lot of different different similarities between creatures. There's even like mermaid creatures in the lakes and rivers. Yeah, and a lot of these things, like I said earlier, I wrote the book because there was a need for it, I thought, because a lot of these creatures, the knowledge doesn't seem to leave Mexico. And in some cases, it doesn't even leave a small region of Mexico. Like there's we're talking about blood sucking creatures. Well, there's a blood sucking witch called the Tlahuelpuchi. And the Tlahuelpuchi is a shape shifting witch that sucks the blood out of babies. And some people say it's used to describe sudden infant death syndrome, right? But this witch, and witches in Mexico, it's funny because there are several different witch creatures, and it's always the same story of a poor marginalized girl who is shunned by the town and whatever. She may be ugly, and then she turns to the dark side, and magic and spiritualism and all of this stuff. So the Tlahuelpuchi is that kind of a creature who is a shape shifting from a woman who practices witchcraft. And what the Tlahuelpuchi will do will she'll change into an animal, and to get into the house, she'll change into like a little fly or an insect to go through the keyhole or go in a crack in a window or whatever, and then poof, appear beside the crib of the baby and then go and suck on the baby, and just like a chupacabra would take all the blood what do they call that? There's a word, dissanguination or something like that, where you take all the blood out, right? But a curious thing about this is this witch only appears in the countryside of Mexico's smallest state called Tlaxcala. And Tlaxcala is like Mexico's Rhode Island. It's a very small, tiny little state. And this witch only appears, or the folklore of the witch only occurs in the villages of this state. And how it came to be known to the outside world, this creature, is in the 50s, there was a young man in the capital city of Tlaxcala State. Tlaxcala City is the capital of the state. And he was going through death documents. And on the death documents, there was a consistent thing that he saw, chupado por la bruja, which was the cause of death for a lot of these young infants. And that means in Spanish, sucked by a witch. And so this guy, wanting to make a name for himself, early 20s, just starting out in life, his career, he showed his boss. And then the boss said, well, we need to investigate this. So then they took people from the capital city to these villages. And then that's how we came to know this legend, or else if this didn't happen, we'd probably still not know about it. And there are a lot of creatures that are down there that are very localized. And, a lot of people don't know of the creatures, even if they're Mexican and you ask them. If you were to ask just an average Mexican, do you know anything about the Tlahuelpuchi? They won't know. So, and as an aside, it's very important for your listeners and viewers to know, how I know all of this stuff is I've owned an import business since 1999. I'm going on 26 years. And I import arts and crafts from Mexico and other parts of Latin America. So I could do a Peru Unexplained and a Brazil Unexplained too. But the search for these crafts have taken me to really out of the way places. And whenever I go to these out of the way places, I ask people, is there a legend, or, what do you know? Anything unusual happen here? Then I'll hear about a UFO crash or something like that. And I'm like all over it. And I was coming home from a buying trip, and I was on the airplane, and I was reading a magazine called Muy Interesante, and that means very interesting in Spanish. And it's a paranormal magazine. It's really slick. I had a subscription to it for a while. And I was sitting, getting comfortable in my airplane seat with the magazine, and I was thinking, nobody knows about the stuff that they're talking about in this magazine. So that's when I started my podcast and my YouTube channel. And I'm constantly going down there to buy merchandise and stuff. And it seems like there's a never ending stream of material. And it's really sad that and I'll make a little commentary here if I may. It's really sad that a lot of North American cryptid and paranormal researchers, they seem to concentrate on Bigfoot, Mothman, Dogman, stuff that's been beaten like a dead horse. There's so much more to investigate and so much more to look into. It seems like a lot of this stuff is overdone, but yeah. So I guess I kind of got bored with reading about the standard cryptids and stuff. And so that's why I started this whole thing, part of the reason.
That's amazing. I thoroughly appreciate your work in doing that as well, because there seems to be, even from like, you've talked also about like UFO reports and stuff like that. And there's a disconnect, especially, I assume, probably just because of the language barrier and stuff. Like, we don't get the news that's coming up here. We don't, if you don't speak Spanish, you don't speak any of that stuff, then you don't see those news. They don't filter in. And we miss a lot of stuff. Like, there's the whole Nazca mummies and the Buga sphere that's going on down in Mexico. And it's Brazil and stuff down there as well. And, none of that stuff, unless you're really into the UFO circles, do we hear about up here.
Yeah, and Mexico has had its share of UFO crashes and landings. In fact, I was on a buying trip one time and I was going through the back roads of, I believe it was Michoacan, one of the states in Mexico. And I always hire drivers, of pickup trucks and vans and stuff to go around to different places. And it's good to talk to somebody, a local person and everything, and then have some help with, loading and things like that. And I was with this guy in the back roads of this state. And we had stopped for lunch, and then we had heard that there was a flying saucer landing in some guy's cornfield. And I was so excited to go, And the guy was charging 20 pesos. It's so funny when things like that happen. If there's an apparition of the Virgin Mary or a strange creature sighting or something like this, then all of these like food vendors and balloon vendors and they're selling little toys and all of this stuff, they pop up. It's like this pop-up shop kind of all of these different things. And so this guy was charging 20 pesos and I was like, let's go, and I said to the driver, I said, I'll pay for your admission. I don't care. And then the driver said, no, he was afraid of radiation. So I didn't get to go, but yeah, there have been saucer crashes. There are a couple of Mexican Roswell incidents. There's even one where a UFO crashed midair with a small plane. And then the Mexican Air Force too was mobilized in a very famous case off the coast of Mexico in the Gulf. I won't say of what, but the Gulf, and they were mobilized. And it was one of the very first times that a government was looking at the UFO phenomenon publicly and asked for help from researchers. And so there's a lot of stuff that, like you said, it doesn't make it to North America, to Canada and the U.S. And so the Canadians and the U.S. people are stuck with the Mothman, the Dogman, the Thunderbird, No, but there are local legends too. I'm just harassing the people who do that, the investigating. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about. That's for sure.
That's a really interesting side note there too. Is your driver was afraid of the radiation, and that leads a lot of like, why do you think it's radioactive? What have you heard? What other what other crashes have happened, and what has happened there that has implanted that specific thought into his head,
Now, it's too bad you weren't in the back seat of that truck because I did not ask him that question. And I probably should have. I just kind of like dismissed it. And I probably should have asked him. That's actually, yeah, why did he think that there were? I just thought, oh, well, UFOs, everybody thinks that, yeah, but exactly. There could be a deeper reason for it. Yeah.
Yeah, you hear it a lot in UFO cases and stuff of crash sites or extremely close encounters with the vehicles themselves is the radiation. Mm-hmm. But right. If you're not interested in those topics and studying that, the average person, I'm assuming, possibly your driver isn't into the same things that me and you are as far as, the weird and bizarre, right? Or was he?
Yeah. I don't think so, no.
Yeah. So why is this such common knowledge that they're radioactive and stuff that he has this aversion towards going and looking at radioactive objects?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Good question. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let me ask you about another creature from the southern area down there that not many people know about. Do you know any sightings or reports of the Mapinguari?
No. What country is that?
Venezuela, Brazil, Portugal. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's basically a living ground sloth that's supposed to still be down there.
Oh, really? No, I've never heard of that before.
Some people think some of the local legends and stuff talk about it having like a mouth in its stomach. Some people describe it as more of a Bigfoot type creature, tall, 8 foot tall, reddish brown hair. Some people describe it as like a giant ground sloth with the big claws on its front hands and stuff. But some people think it's a giant anteater, but they don't report it having the long proboscis or the nose of it. So, no.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that one before. Sorry.
Okay. No, it's fair. I got you here, and I'm gonna drill you on everything that I know down there.
Yeah. Venezuela is a whole other world. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there could be dozens of cryptids that I've never heard of. Yeah, sure.
No, absolutely. I don't know how far, because I know you've been, a little bit outside of Mexico and stuff as well. So I don't know how far you go, and I don't know how far these legends come up and stuff. So definitely.
Yeah, I go pretty much everywhere, but not so much lately. Okay, because I've been in business now for almost next month will be 26 years, and so I have people in these countries who send me stuff. But then sometimes when I want a little adventure or whatever, I'll do a buying trip and, go down to wherever and just pick a place and get new stuff, freshen up my merchandise and things like that. But yeah, I go to a lot of different places, but not so much anymore.
That's fair. That's fair. I appreciate the honesty, and the I don't know is always an acceptable answer. So
yeah, and you know what? I really like what I'm doing because I get a chance to learn myself. And I have the right to learn too from my work, from what I do. And I have a lot of people who contact me and say, oh, when I was a little kid, I spent time with my grandma who lives in a small town in Oaxaca, Mexico. And there's tales of a monster who lives in the cave or whatever. And I'm like, oh, tell me more, tell me more. Because like I said earlier, a lot of these legends are localized, and a lot of people who even live in the same state have never heard of some of these creatures or legends. So anybody who wants to contact me with stuff, I'm all for it. And I learn a lot from doing, this project. So I don't know. Yeah, that's a cue to say, hey, tell me more. And so, yeah, I'm ever curious. So I'm glad when people come forth with new stuff that I can look at.
absolutely. Well, so you've mentioned this earlier already, but you said there's 2 different types of Bigfoot creatures down there. So tell us all about those guys.
Well, first we have to set the context. A lot of people, when they think of Mexico, they think of Clint Eastwood movies and dusty Western towns, deserts, and all this stuff. A lot of people don't know that there are a couple of glaciers in Mexico. There are mountains so high that they have permanent snowpack. So they have glaciers. And in this this glacial environment, they have even search and rescue teams who've been trained in Switzerland, for mountain rescue, because, a lot of hikers go into these mountains. And so it's not quite the Clint Eastwood dusty, Mexican Western town. And Mexico is such a vast place that there are forests that are similar to the Pacific Northwest of the United States. A lot of people don't think of pine and oak forests when they think of Mexico. But the northern part of the state of Puebla, for example, people only started to go into those northern valleys and, mountains and steep valleys only in the 1860s. Indigenous people never even went there because it was too remote and there was nothing really there except endless forest. So in the 1860s is when people started to intrude into the territory of one of the Bigfoot creatures. Now then we have another Bigfoot creature that's more well documented and has a longer history in the southern part of Mexico, which is more jungle. And some people are familiar with the jungles of Mexico, the Maya, pyramids sticking out of the jungle canopy and all of that. So the one down in the jungle is called the Sisamite. And the Sisamites ranges from the southern states of Mexico down into Central America. And he stands pretty tall. I guess he would be like 6'2", 6'4", and he's skinny and very shy. He's a shy, skinny, furry creature, hominid. And he features in the Maya legends. He's been seen on like pottery in other illustrations as well, and it's part of the folklore. And it's more like it's kind of a cross between a real animal and a spirit animal. So it's kind of like an animal with magical powers. They kind of think the same way towards the jaguar that lives in the jungle. It's a real animal, but it has magical powers. So the Sisamite is very shy, and we only heard about it in the Western, outside of Mexico, when a circus performer of all people from Canada went down and was a prospector, and something woke him up in his tent. And then he asked people, locally who that was or what it was. And then they said it was the Sisamite. And so then when he went back to Canada, he wrote, it appeared in some newspaper article. So that was like the first exposure to that. But it's been around for a long time, and some people think that that creature is what's also called the Olmec ape. And the Olmec ape, it's a legend from the Olmecs. We don't know a whole lot about that group of people. They're called the mother civilization of Mesoamerica, of ancient Mexico. But there's a figurine that is a Bigfoot figurine from 3,500 years ago, something like that. It's called the Olmec ape. You can look that up. But some people say that that's the Sisamite. So, okay, that's the jungle-dwelling Bigfoot who's kind of shy and whatever. So the other Bigfoot in the more alpine regions of Mexico near the glaciers is called the Cuatlacas. And he's like a bigger, buff, angry, 7 feet tall, monster like in the Pacific Northwest. And his habitat has only been encroached upon, like I said, since the 1860s. And mostly since the 1960s, with illegal logging penetrating into this really remote area. And one of the first stories about this creature was a couple of illegal loggers were in the territory of the Cuatlacas, and they woke up in the middle of the night to screaming and, all this horrendous noise. Then when they looked out at their truck in the morning, there was a huge log that had been thrown on the truck. And then how this story came out is they had to go to the park rangers. They had to walk down, for miles and miles and miles out of this forest and contact park rangers to get them out of that wilderness. So they actually had to tell their story and admit that they were doing illegal stuff in this area. And, in order to get out of there. But there have been other stories of this creature too. People who've been hiking on these glaciated mountains, like there's one called Iztaccíhuatl, which is really close to Mexico City. You can see it from Mexico City. I used to live and work in Mexico City in the mid-90s, and my office could walk outside and you can see the dormant volcanoes on the skyline. But Iztaccíhuatl, it's permanently snow-packed, and people have hiked in the snow and have seen this creature, this big furry creature, climbing up the glacier in a very fast pace. And so there's even a video clip that's out there and a couple of photographs if you look really hard online. But some people think that part of the foot of this creature is like a what do they call it, a crampon, or where, you know, those spikes that you put into the snow or the ice when you're doing ice climbing, or, you know, climbing on a glacier. And part of the foot can be used like the tool that hikers use, climbers use. And so that's why he can climb a glacier really fast, because of the way his foot is designed. So I don't know. But these stories are fascinating, I think. Yeah, so the Quatlocus is a relatively recent Bigfoot, and it approximates the Pacific Northwest, bigger, buff, you know. And then the Sisamite's been well known in the legends for up to 4,000 years, and he's more shy and skinny and jungle dwelling. So yeah, those are the two Bigfoot creatures.
Interesting. Yeah, so there's the Bergman's law says that creatures are bigger the closer that you get to the equator, or, sorry, away from the equator. So it's kind of interesting. You know, I've always heard, like, up here in Wisconsin and this area, our creatures are kind of maybe 6 to 7 feet, I think, mostly. But as you get down into Oklahoma and Texas, they get bigger. This is where you hear a lot of the big, mean, you know, ones. And I've always kind of wondered, you know, like, when you get farther down, it's kind of the opposite, you know, whereas the equator should be the smaller animals, and then it's, I don't know. So it's interesting, the size dynamic of them there. But
yeah,
interesting. No, it's cool. It's really neat to see that it goes back that far in legends and folklore and stuff down there. So.
Well, you know what? We have, because the Spanish encountered living, breathing civilizations when they went to Mexico, there were intact stories that went back thousands and thousands of years. And there were a lot of people who came with the conquistadors, support people like priests, monks, you know, a lot of clerical people took notes. And they were like the first anthropologists, because they wanted to get inside the heads of these natives, you know, these people whom they encountered. They wanted to learn as much as they could about them, because the more you learn about them, the easier they are to convert to Christianity, to, you know, make them subjects of the Spanish king and all of that. You learn their language, you learn all this stuff about them. So we have a lot of stuff from the early conquest period, volumes of things written by priests who, and other clerical people who wanted to get to know these peoples that they encountered. And some of these books and diaries are very thorough. And yeah, we have a lot of information as a consequence of that. And then there are living legends that have not been forgotten because of the conquest, that have been passed down, like the Tlahuelpuchi that I talked about. No one knows how long that shape-shifting witch legend has been around. It could be 4,000 to 5,000 years. So there's been culture in Mexico unbroken for 5,000 to 6,000 years. So there's a lot of stuff, you know, whether it's history, legends, religion, whatever. And a lot of it we still have access to, even if it's really old. So yeah.
That's awesome.
I can never want for material, that's for sure.
That's a good thing, though.
Yeah.
That's good. So, talking about some of the legends and stuff down there, what do the indigenous people, what do the older generations down there talk about as far as like the dogman creatures? I know we were talking before the show, in the U.S. here, we don't have a lot of indigenous dogman stories, but they do up in Canada. And, you know, that's kind of like a French thing up there, because they also have the creature like the Rougarou down in
From
the French
Louisiana. Yeah.
Louisiana.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a French legends and stuff. So do they have legends and lore from the indigenous people and stuff there, the tribes down in Mexico?
Well, it's a big combination of things. So you have, and then so you have the European influence, you have the indigenous, and then you also have the African influence, because a lot of people, they don't think of glaciers when they think of Mexico. They also don't think of black African slaves, but there were thousands of them that were imported directly from Africa and also from the Caribbean, and they've brought their legends too. So that's a big part of the mix too that doesn't get talked about a lot. That gets very much overlooked. And when I was doing deep research, like I did a show about witch trials and pacts with the devil. And I was looking at some old archival information, and I noticed that black women were tried as witches more so than any other group down there, because they were bringing a lot of their healing arts and, their medicine and their folk religion from, the older, from Africa, and also from the, Caribbean to, for a few generations there. But so there is a blend of different beliefs. And to tie that into the dog man, there is a creature in Mexico that goes back thousands and thousands of years. No one knows how far it goes back. It's in every single culture. It's in the Maya culture, the Olmecs, Toltecs, Aztecs. All of them have this creature. It's called the Nahual. And it's a dog man, but it also has feline characteristics. So it's not I guess it wouldn't be completely a dog man, because there are some feline characteristics to this creature. But basically, it's a shapeshifter again. And it's usually a shaman. It's never a woman, okay? It's a man always. A shaman in the village or someone else. Some people can turn into a Nahual for nefarious reasons. A lot of times that's the case, where you want to do something bad to somebody, then you figure out how to transform yourself into this snarling, feline, canine creature. And it walks on all four, or it doesn't walk on all fours, it walks upright. And it lurks around at night, and it, can kill livestock and people. And yeah, it's a shape-shifting creature that goes back thousands and thousands of years. And it's been, that whole idea of Nahual has been kind of co-opted it was co-opted in the 60s by Carlos Castaneda, a novelist who wrote in Spanish from Peru. He wasn't Mexican, but he took the idea of Nahual and meaning, and to him, in his writings, it means like your alter ego, like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde sort of situation. But it really isn't that. It's more, it's somebody who deliberately practices this. It's not an alter ego. It's somebody who deliberately wants to practice the whole art of shapeshifting, and they're adept at it, and it's part of their identity. It's not like a part of the id or super ego or anything like that. It's, yeah. So anyway, yeah, it's an interesting creature. And you see illustrations of Nahuals going back to the Olmec civilization thousands of years ago. The Aztecs had some beautiful illustrations. If you go to my Nahual show on either my website or YouTube, you'll see in the codexes, which were bark paper books that ancient Mexicans made. In the bark paper books, they have illustrations of this creature. It's pretty scary looking too. Yeah.
That's really interesting. It's like very similar to the Navajo skinwalker, where you have a
Right.
bad medicine man. In a lot of the Native American cultures and stuff, the indigenous people, you have the medicine men or the shamans of the tribe that can shapeshift into different animals and different beings and stuff, but not for nefarious reasons. Just because to help them hunt, or for the betterment of the tribe. But with this creature, it's very synonymous with the skinwalker being a dark entity that they transform for
Right.
malicious reasons. Very
Yeah, it's very similar. I lived in New Mexico for a while, so I've heard of that creature before, and I've known people who have seen that creature too. So I have not, but
Do you think there's stories like up in Utah and stuff, where there's a lot of the Ute tribes and stuff? They've talked about the mysterious Aztec gold being buried up there and so on, that
mhm.
the Aztecs were from or went back to Utah. And that, do you think that the reason why those lore are similar is because the people might have left it there, or had encounters that way, like that
Yeah,
those two are?
yeah, there's the language family speaks for itself. Uto-Aztecan language family. So the Aztecs were not originally from central Mexico. They only arrived on the scene in the early 1300s. And their own legends say that they came from up north. And linguists will say, yeah, they are related to the tribes up north. So it makes sense that legends would be very similar. And there also was contact, very slight, very indirect, in some cases direct contact between the southwestern Anasazi people and people in central Mexico. There were trade routes. You can find turquoise from New Mexico, for example, in burials, elite burials, because it was an elite good, elite burials in central Mexico. And then conversely, you can find like parrot feathers, macaw feathers in New Mexico, Utah, Arizona burials too. So you see that there was some interchange there. And then definitely there were migrations out of the Southwest, probably because of drought, different, conditions changing, overpopulation, whatever. They definitely did move south into Mexico. So you'll see some similarities.
That's interesting. It seems like there's no such thing as a coincidence. So when you
Right.
start hearing these stories that kind of match up, and you go, I wonder if there's a connection there. So,
Yeah.
interesting. So do you know anything about I believe it's Aztec lore, talking about the Zodal, which is their version of Anubis, their dog-headed deity of the dead?
Well, say the name again. What was?
I believe it's like Zodal, like axolotl, but it has merged. The name has become axolotl, the little creatures that everyone sees now. But it's XOLET. No,
I'm wondering
TE.
if you're thinking. Well, I'm wondering if you're thinking of a Weasot. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what.
It's the brother of Quetzalcoatl.
Well, you know what? Let's talk a little bit about the Aztec pantheon.
Sure.
There was an emperor. See, and this has happened in the West also with religion. There's, a ruler that comes along and says we need to standardize things. So there was an emperor, Awisot, who was a very strong expansionistic conqueror, and he was actually named after a cryptid. The Awisot is the Loch Ness monster counterpart in the central lake that the capital city of the Aztecs was built on. But this emperor tried to standardize Aztec religion because there were different groups who were not outside the Aztec ethnicity. There were different groups within the same ethnicity that had different names for different things and different functions of different gods. Quetzalcoatl, in some stories, has a brother. Some stories he has a twin. Some stories he's a real ruler, you know. And so there are a lot of stories about the same entity, let's say. So the brother of Quetzalcoatl, I'm not sure exactly because there are so many different stories to keep straight,
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, so there's a lot of confusion. That's what I'm saying about that. But yeah, so anyway, the gods are very interesting, and that emperor was really interesting too, being named after that cryptid. The cryptid basically was a gigantic lake creature. Some people think that it was a real animal, a prehistoric river otter, because it had a tail, it was furry, but it would come out of the water and capsize ships and take people under the water. And so when the Spanish arrived, they came to this capital city and then they made it their own, their capital of their the viceroyalty of New Spain. And what they had to do is they had to drain the lake that the island was built on. So there are some accounts of this creature by early Spanish colonists, but by the time they drained the lake, the habitat was gone. So if there was a real creature, then it would have died, you know, from lack of habitat. So that's the equivalent of the Loch Ness monster, a lake monster that could be real, maybe it's not real. So a little segue there.
Interesting. If it was an otter type creature, though, it could survive on land. You know, not like water dwellers that would just
Right.
dry up.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. Is there any other reports of like the Nessie style or the plesiosaur or serpent creatures down in Mexico?
Well, there is an old legend of the Tlanchana, which is a serpent woman. Now, we talked a little bit about syncretism. That has morphed into a mermaid-like creature. But originally, the Aztecs and the people before them believed that the Tlanchana was a serpent, but it was female in nature and it would lure men into the water. So, and how I found out about the Tlanchana, this is very interesting. I was down Ecatepec. I was in this town called Ecatepec, and I was buying nativity sets for Christmas, little creche sets. And in all of the nativity sets, there was a little mermaid playing a guitar. And I was like, there wasn't a mermaid. You know, you got the three wise men, you know, maybe a shepherd boy, a sheep, you know, those are the elements, the Holy Family, baby Jesus. Those are the elements of a nativity set. But what's a mermaid playing a guitar for? What is that all about? And then I asked, and they said, well, that's the Tlanchana. And then that's when I heard about this creature. And then I did more research into it. And it's not just a mermaid singing, you know, playing the guitar, luring bad men to their fate. It goes back farther, you know, thousands of years before. And it was called the Altonchana before it got corrupted into the Tlanchana. And that creature was more of a serpent, a sea serpent, but it was confined to lakes mostly. And one of the places where the Tlanchana supposedly hangs out was part of what do you call it? The sporting event where you're bicycling and you're swimming and
Triathlon?
Right, exactly. Thank you. I couldn't remember that. And they had to swim in this lake, you know, as part of that sporting event. And the locals were saying, no, you know, all these young, fit men in the water, you're going to have people disappear. You know, these young guys who are fit and everything, they're going to disappear because the Tlanchana lives in there. And some of the people were telling that story to other competitors to try to punk them out, you know, to make them afraid, you know. the top guy, you want to go up to him and say, you hear there's this like mermaid in the lake there that kills people, especially young guys. But there were no instances of anything happening there. And then some of the locals then said, well, it's because there were too many people in the lake and the Tlanchana is more one-on-one, So, but pretty interesting.
Absolutely. And as fascinating as all of that is, why was the mermaid in the nativity?
That's a good question. Because they wanted to they wanted to make something that was very local, and they wanted to honor her, and because she's a spirit that's just around, in the town. And so it has a quasi-religious aspect to it, okay? Because it is a spirit, and it has powers. So you want to include the powerful spirits in your little thing, so every base is covered, So that was the reason, I guess.
Just kind of like the holy water spirit.
Yeah. So you don't want to tick them off. You don't want to tick off these spirits. And we can go on for hours and hours and hours talking about this, but briefly, there are two different types of little people in Mexico too that live in the forest that you have to honor them, and putting the Tlanchana in the nativity is like honoring these little people, these spirits, because you don't want to mess with them. You want to keep them happy. So in the case of the Tlanchana, the spirit of the Tlanchana sees that she's being included, so she's not going to mess with you. And so with these little people too, alushas and chaneques, you want to offer them things if you go through their territory. You don't want to tick them off because they'll come back and cause mischief in your life. They'll take your keys, they'll break into your house, they'll steal your dog, things like that. So kind of along the similar lines. You want to keep these spirits happy so that, all's well that ends well.
Absolutely. I want to dig more into that in a second here, but I want to remind people we are live and we are coming up here on the end of the show. So if you have any questions for my guests, throw them in the comments section. Change. I think Shane here said the Mexican, my Mexican friends have told me that they have seen the change, the shapeshifter. I think that was back when we were talking about the
Nawal.
Yeah. So very interesting. But
well, I hope he wasn't talking about the Tlahuelpuchi. That was the shape-shifting witch. You don't want to come up against her.
Interesting. So I've heard you talk about the little people on other episodes, other shows and stuff as well. And the first thing that came to mind is, it's very similar to the Icelandic lore of the elves and the fairies and stuff. And you're talking about they're building this bridge and it kept collapsing until they appeased the guys there. And it's the same thing over in Ireland and that they literally cut corners off of houses and put up little fairy houses and stuff. So is there a connection? You talked about the Spain and Spaniards coming over. Is there any Icelanders or Ireland or any is there a connection over there to Mexico as to why they have those stories, or did they grow organically in Mexico?
I think they grew organically in Mexico, but it's interesting that you mentioned, is there a connection? Because there's a mythical figure in the Maya world called Votan, and he came from the east, and some people think that he was an actual Viking who landed in the Yucatan, like around 800, 900 AD, something like that. But the concepts of illusion Cheneke predate this supposed, visitor from Scandinavia. But I think, I don't know, could it be an archetype that all of us, have within us, this little people thing or giants? It seems like it's in every culture. So
Mhm.
I don't know if it necessarily means that there was a super culture before, or it's an archetype that we all think about stuff like that. I don't know.
Even so, if like if you look at these things like if they're the same beings that are over there, how did they get to Mexico? I mean, like you cross the land bridge, the back in the day, the whole Pangea, the whole like continents and everything was all connected in one big glob and stuff. So how long ago was it that these little guys made it from Iceland and Ireland and stuff down to Mexico? It's just it's fascinating that you have such the same folklore, the same legends, the same stories in separate parts of the world. And I mean, look at the pyramids, look at all the cultural stuff of all the UFO and lore and mythology is all these sites and stuff. It's just fascinating to see how all over the world you have these same kind of stories and legends.
Yeah, and then some people will use Atlantis or Mu, to fill in the cracks. And I leave everything on the table, so I won't like poo-poo that. But it's
Mhm.
interesting that what you were saying, could these be real creatures? So if they are real creatures, then they migrated with the humans, you know?
Mhm.
So the same type of creature who's in Ireland who you have to appease or else he'll do tricks on you, that same creature could be in the Yucatan. If you want to believe that these are real creatures, then it makes perfect sense, actually, doesn't it? It makes more sense than they came up with it independently and it's just a legend, right? So there might be something to that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we have no questions today. This is
Uh,
interesting. I have nothing. I'm very disappointed in you people. You just need to know
uh,
that. Even Lee is quiet, and Lee is my regular and the indescribable Octoman. They're here pretty often, but they're quiet. Very
well, you know what? I think a lot of the material that I introduce is brand new to people, and so
absolutely.
it might be hard to ask questions about it. I don't know.
Yeah. You don't know what you don't know. So how can you ask a question
Right.
about it? Absolutely. Well, very interesting. Let's cover real quick here. Tell me about your books here. So you got the Mexican Monsters book. What can people expect out of there?
Well, a lot of what we talked about today is in the book, and then plus dozens of other creatures and stuff. And I go into sightings and legends, and I try to cover everything. And since I published this book, I've had other shows that I've done about other creatures. So this is not the end all be all. I can come up probably in the next 2 or 3 years. I could do a volume two, I think, of this. So yeah, this covers the basic, more well-known creatures. So you'll see the Mexican Bigfoot, the Loch Ness monster, and then on the cover there is the chupacabra also. So
You gotta
yeah.
have him. And you got a couple other books out here as well. Mexico Unexplained: The Magic Mysteries and Miracles of Mexico. You want to give a quick synopsis of that?
Yeah, that was my first book. It's a little bit of everything. I have ancient history, legends. I have UFO stuff in there. Yeah, it's just a sampling of some of my more popular shows and blog posts, basically.
And the coloring book. And that I assume this is probably the most difficult read, like the highest grade level. So
Um, well, you know what? Some of them, yeah, well, some of it is kind of difficult to read because some of the creatures I put their indigenous names, so there's actually some reading to do in the coloring book and it is difficult. Yeah, so that has all of the creatures that are in the book, the written book, plus some extras, some that because the coloring book came after the regular book about the monsters, so I added some other ones in there too.
very cool. And I got to go the other way here to get to the Mexican Miracles, Virgin Saints, Shrines of Mexico.
So that one is the top religious blogs and articles and, topics I've covered. And so you have like the saints of Mexico, apparitions, did Jesus really appear on a tortilla in Mexico? All that stuff, anything to do with religion. Mexico's a very deeply religious country, so this was a pretty easy book to write for me, because there's a ton of material.
Very good, man. Awesome. In the show notes for today's show, we have links to your website, Mexico Unexplained, as well as I included the Amazon link for all of your books. So if anybody's interested in grabbing yourself a copy of those books, you can go over there. But for those of us out there just listening, tell us about your podcast, where they can listen to it, and your YouTube channel, anything else you got coming up.
Well, it's Mexico Unexplained. You can go to mexicounexplained.com, and that's like the clearinghouse. And there are links to all the different places. I'm on Apple Podcasts, and I just signed up for Spreaker. So I'm on Spreaker now. And then YouTube I've been on for almost 10 years. And so, yeah, go there, and I want to hear from you. So contact me. I love hearing from the audience, and I love learning about new things. So, yeah, hit me up, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today too, Barnaby. It's been great. Yeah, I've had a good time.
I've thoroughly looked forward to having you on, because I'm trying to cover all the states and researchers in each state, as well as the different countries and stuff. And I got people from Australia and Europe and stuff on here. Wow. So I'm really excited to talk to you about all the Mexican stuff. So it's been a pleasure, man.
Yeah.
Well, I will definitely, for those maybe you don't know, but my audience knows, on Thursdays I also do a paranormal spectrum, which is all the paranormal and weird. And I would love to have you back on there sometime to talk about all the more spirits and other oddities and creatures from down in Mexico. So if you enjoyed this show, let me know. We will set him up to come back on there and chat more. So awesome. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, and your wealth of knowledge. It's great to hear some of the more legends and lore that we don't get to hear about very often. And I want to thank you for your hard work in bringing these legends and stuff and promoting it with your books and your appearances and stuff for everyone out there to learn. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me, and let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. I will definitely hit you up, man. All right. You take care. You have a great day.
You too. Thanks.
All right, guys, that is our show for this week here on Monsters on the Edge. I want to thank you guys all for liking and sharing and subscribing all things here on the Untold Radio Network. Make sure you check out the books, and go check out Robert's website, because it is chock full of all kinds of blogs and interesting information, from cryptids to spiritual to just archaeology and different things from Mexico. It's a whole bunch of cool stuff on there, very easy to navigate. And then also go check out his show on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts, and I assume the links for that are in the show notes, or just look up Unexplained Mexico. There we go. Check it out and enjoy all the cool stuff from down there. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, guys, I'll see you on the edge.